I'll let you know. All right, we are live. Hey, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Third Coast Grappling Radio. The interview, Corona Chronicles, Coronaverse special, whatever you want to call it. We're coming out of quarantine, but we're coming out with a lot more informed after this podcast. I'm hoping. So, I am joined by Dr. Andrew Degar. He's also a partner with us on Third Ward BJJ, and also Corri Levine. She's been with us before to discuss the corona, that whatever's been going on. These are the people that I go to for advice. So it's great to have them both on at the same time. And yeah, how you guys doing?
Pretty good. You know, staying at home, staying mostly quarantined.
What about you, Andrew? How you been doing?
Yes. Oh, we've been good. Sarah and I are trying to train consistently at home. You know, it's hard. It's just not the same without like a team and more training partners. So keeping busy with my work in consulting is keeping me super busy right now for all the pharma companies going crazy right now.
Yeah, I can imagine you're in high demand right now. So kind of a cool thing. You give up your job to start the Jiu-Jitsu school, and all of a sudden, you know, the medical world calls you back.
Yeah, kind of good and bad timing.
So it works out. It's like The Godfather 3. Just when I thought I was out, they pull me back in. Kind of thing.
We get Third Ward open for 9 weeks, and then we close down through COVID. So yeah, good timing.
Yeah, man, perfect. Hey, at least we got to have some high level rolling in there before it was shut down.
That's true.
All right. Well, I guess we'll get right into it. So coronavirus, March until now, what's changed? I mean, we canceled our event, I believe, or I can't remember the exact date, but the event was March 14th. I think we canceled it like the 10th or something. So what's changed from March to May now? I mean, what have you guys seen?
Yeah, I mean, so cases have increased, obviously. You know, I guess the same way I started the last time I was on the podcast, I've got the Johns Hopkins map up. We're at 4.3 million cases with just about 300,000 deaths across the globe. US is leading the way with just about 1.4 million cases. So that's a bit scary. But we're starting to, you know, in the past couple months, we've had the lockdowns, and you know, in some places, cases have been plateauing, just kind of holding steady. Other cases are starting to go down, which is great. But what we're going to see across the country is, you know, there's still going to be areas where we have an increase in cases, and we really need to watch out in those areas to make sure that it doesn't get out of control.
Yeah, for sure. What are you seeing, Doc?
So one of the big things is the testing. Is you know, more and more the FDA has been allowing more emergency use authorization on a lot of products. When, you know, everything first hit in the United States, we basically had one assay to use. And I checked earlier today, I think for the live virus, there's, I think, about 22 different versions we can use now. And now we have all the use of the antibody tests that are coming more and more on the authorization. So we're seeing this big increase in numbers because, you know, one, the virus is still spreading. Two, we actually have ways to test for it where we didn't have it before.
So with the testing, that's been kind of a hot button issue when it's come in. What was the big issue with the rollout, and why such kind of a, I guess, fumble, or I guess kind of a perceived fumble and everything that happened?
So this was really a big flop on the CDC's part. When it comes to anything that's being run in a massive testing, there has to be specific validation that goes through. When the CDC released their testing methodology, they had it specifically to one type of machine for the real-time PCR. You know, this machine they dictated to be used as a 12-year-old model that was only used for diagnostic purposes. So where in the city of Houston, we have hundreds of qPCR machines, we only had a handful of this one specific type of machine. So the testing was just in a funnel of how many we could actually perform within the country. Luckily, they have changed that, and they've released that almost any type of machine can be used now under emergency use authorization.
Man, that's pretty crazy. So, is that why you're seeing mainly a lot of the increases in positive is because the virus was here kind of unchecked for as long as it was, and they're now testing is just more prevalent, or is it actual more of an aggressive spread, or how do you see? I mean, what's to make of all this? I mean, the data, they're saying it was all data driven, how the responses were made, but the data was missing like critical elements, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, yeah, I mean, it's just confusing.
It's kind of it's a mix there, because obviously the virus is still spreading. I mean, you can check even for Harris County, you can look on their public health website and see how many cases they're announcing a day. And the number's still growing. So the virus is still spreading. Whether or not that we have a faster spread, in certain parts of Houston or Texas in general versus where we were, before lockdown, it's kind of undetermined. We had no clue how to actually test these people. Even when they first were starting up these mobile testing units, they were swabbing people incorrectly. And so we kind of have this weird idea that where, one, we couldn't test. 2, the tests were done improperly, and 3, there's plenty of people who are getting sick and not getting tested. How many people are afraid of going in? So it's a hard number to say.
Yeah, that's funny you say that. I mean, a lot of people could be like, well, I do feel kind of crappy, but do I really want to go get locked in a bubble room and have a swab shoved down my nose and like have to go and be a pariah to my family for 2 weeks? Like I mean, I don't know, man. It's a unique time, but I think the way the government's kind of gone about it is I don't know. It just seems kind of neat. It seems kind of knee jerky.
Yeah, I mean, so there's a couple just talking about the testing and how fast it's spreading and whatnot. I get caught up in the data, so I see numbers and graphs, and I start pulling the numbers out myself and doing my own calculations. And so one of the things that I look at is the percent positive. So you look at, the number of positive cases compared to the total tests that were conducted. And obviously, this number is going to change depending on the number of tests. You can definitely see that in the Texas counts. On their low testing days, we get a lot of positive cases. But it's good to look at that trend over time as well. Mm-hmm. So, you want to see that number consistently going down with either continued, flatline testing or increased testing. Yeah. So that's something that I play around with a lot.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess something that, people were kind of confused about is all that information came out about the CDC cutting in half the actual COVID-19 death rates. And I even messaged you, Corri, about it. Like, why are they classifying pneumonia deaths and this and that as COVID deaths? I mean, I get pneumonia and that are symptoms of COVID, but it just seems like there's more at play, because if you bundle all those things together rather than try and discern what's what, I mean, you're not really getting an accurate picture.
Yeah. And I mean, with a lot of that, so I don't work in the clinic, so I don't know specifically how it's done, but you have a death certificate and you have a cause of death and you have an underlying cause of death and, all sorts of things that go into that. And, it's a physician filling it out. And so it's their best guess if they don't have any other data. You look at what the clinical signs and symptoms are and you say yes or no. And in some cases, you can't say it's due to COVID if you don't have a COVID positive test, even if all signs point to COVID. So, yeah.
That's because what's odd about it is that there's people that'll get tested and they're like, all right, have a great day. We'll let you know in 48 to 72 hours if you have coronavirus. It's like what there's just, it's something weird there. Like, if you have a presumptive positive, or if you have somebody that you truly believe might have it, why are you testing them and just letting them back out into the population the way they are?
Well, that has to do a lot with also the overload within the hospitals too. Yeah. Where that's been the biggest fear of all of this is overloading. What we saw happen in Italy, and the big fear was, how many respirators do we have in the city of Houston? We are the medical district of the world, but when you look at our ICU ICU numbers, our ventilator numbers, that's where the worry is. There's so many of these people that have to be put on, oxygen therapy. Well, we only have so much that we can put on at one time. So if we get overloaded with the system, it's kind of going to the point of who gets it.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like a combat mentality. Like when you're in the field, it's like, you got to kind of, ration out, your equipment and your final stuff to the people most needed. And
yeah, it's scary. I mean, I've been on phone calls where that's been a topic of discussion. Like, hey, if we start to see a ramp up, what are other hospitals doing to decide? And, really trying to get those contingency plans in place. And especially in Texas, as Andrew said, we've got plenty of equipment in Houston, but what about the rest of Texas?
Yeah, I mean, it's, yeah, but see, what's crazy about us is, do you think that the fact that we're so spread out and not so densely populated like a New York or a Los Angeles that has a lot to do with Texas's relatively low infection rate? Or do you think it more has to do with just our preparedness? What would you say? I'll let Andrew or you could take it.
I would say both. When you think about the population density in New York City versus Houston, I've only been in Texas a handful of years, but for being the third, fourth largest city in the country, it doesn't feel it. Even where I live in the Midtown Third Ward area, it's not overly dense. It's not people living on top of each other like in New York. It's 400, 500 square miles if you count all the loops of Houston. So that is one thing that worked in our favor. The other is, we stopped the rodeo. That was a big thing that worked in our favor in our numbers. And we got hit with COVID later than like New York, Washington State. We had some time to prep and kind of realize once it was coming here, it was a good move to shut down faster.
Yeah, for sure. I agree. And, what do you see in terms of vaccines? Is that going to be a reality, or is that just poppy talk? I mean, is this something that you're just going to treat with a Z-Pack and say, hey, have a great day? Or is this going to be something that we're going to be able to build up a vaccine similar to flu vaccines?
So that's where it can get super political in conversation. I will say that
I'm not anti-vax. I don't even get into any of that. Like, I'm not a anti-vax. I'm like, if it makes your life live longer, if you're, whatever, get it. Like, I'm kind of one of those. So yeah, no need for all that.
Even on the political side of working with like actual like NIH grants and everything, where I was at the Virology department at Baylor, we had Dr. Peter Hotez, who is, this phenomenal scientist. You've probably seen him on all the media outlets because he did a lot of work in SARS and everything. His team was basically building up the type of repertoire needed to make a vaccine for for coronaviruses. And, they lost funding a few years ago. And, all the major virologists, everyone out there has been saying, what we saw with SARS in 2003, 2004 time is what we would be seeing happening as a major pandemic. We've seen these different flu mutations, but coronaviruses was the one they all feared. And here we are. And yet we have no further production on a COVID-based or coronavirus-based vaccine yet.
I mean, what does that say about us though? As a country, we're supposed to be the worldwide leader in healthcare and all this other stuff. And I mean, what does this say about us? Yeah, I mean that's what happened, right? A lot of the funding.
Yeah, so it's this weird thing, and my doctorate's in pharmaceutical sciences. I actually worked in a vaccine lab, where I was doing all my work was in place, and all these people have this big fear of big pharma. It's not always a big pharma making these vaccines. It's grad students. It's like postdocs. These are the people who are doing these things. It's never the big money coming in. Most of the time, it's like, hey, we'll give you your doctorate for that vaccine, and then it gets put in publication. So, it comes down to funding. It comes down to listening to what the epidemiologists are seeing, what the virologists are seeing, and, not cutting funding to scientists.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. And like there was something that came up. I was watching that silly documentary, The Plandemic thing, which, I've now realized it's complete ridiculousness, but they say that the majority of patents are done through universities. So is that basically grad students creating something and saying, hey, here you go. It gets given the patent to because the university technically would have, oversight over your work, right?
Mm-hmm. It all depends on how you're funded. So like the lab I worked in, I did my doctorate in Atlanta. We were a mile away from the CDC. The guy had countless patent works with the CDC for different vaccines. And, for those, sure. But when it's like an NIH grant or, any type of, academic based grant, it's a different type of patenting. If you're collaborating with a big group, or even if you're collaborating with a pharmaceutical group, they'll try to put the patent on it right away. They're kind of like, oh, we're funding your lab, but we get the product at the end. So.
Yeah, that's interesting how that all works. So what do you see, I guess, in terms of jujitsu and the coronavirus? Corey, I'll let you go first. Everybody's doing something different. Everybody's saying, you got these guys in California that are like, I've got to feed my family. I'm going to open my gym. You got people on the East Coast. I got to feed my family. I got to open my gym. How is 500 people at Home Depot okay, but I can't, go to my jujitsu? What's up with all this? Like, how do you see things coming back? And do you see it snapping back quickly or being a gradual thing for jujitsu?
I really think it's going to have to be gradual just to be safe about all of it. And for any of this, even with the phased reopening, it's all about risk management and understanding where your risks are and how you can mitigate them. So I've seen the video that Drac put out, Professor Dracolino for Gracie Baja, and I think that, it's a really good plan. Keeping distance, limiting class sizes, you're doing symptom checks at the front door. I think that's a really good way to go and a good way to open, and also keeping the online presence so that people who can't come in or can't get a class on the schedule can still train at home. Mm-hmm. But I don't think, we can't rush back into this, especially with partner training, because, you say Home Depot or going shopping or the movie theater, you can still at least make a good attempt at maintaining a 6-foot distance. You can wear a mask, you can go at off hours, but jujitsu is face-to-face.
But if it's face-to-face and it's you're saying I'm not sick, I have no symptoms, I'm not sick. How long can that go on? If you don't feel symptomatic, and if do you have to have a test? Do you think people should get tested to be able to say, hey, I have the antibodies, I'm clear to train? what's the end game?
There's a couple things with that, and I'll let Andrew talk about the antibody testing, because that's a whole nother thing. But what we're seeing and what we're learning right now, just from, the more cases we have, the more we learn. And so we are seeing asymptomatic carriers. So people who aren't actively coughing, sneezing, they feel fine, but they're still carrying the virus and they still can transmit. And so, if you might feel fine, but that doesn't mean you don't have the virus. And then you and I go and train and, we got some good side control, something, and breathing heavily and all that, you just spread it to me.
Sweat in the eyeball.
Yeah. I think it's something like a 2% asymptomatic rate is what I've seen at a few different institutions.
But how long can we go on with that level of stuff in our head? Is that going to be forever? Eventually it's going to have to be back hey, it's jujitsu. Hey, we need to put our hands on each other and all right, enough's enough. Do you think June 1st is too soon for that? That's 2 weeks from now. 2 weeks from now.
Well, that is 2 weeks from now.
That's
time flies. Again, it depends. So for competition, so I think I looked at what Dana White did for UFC, and I was actually pretty impressed with the plans they put in place. Whether or not they adhered to all of it, I don't know, but at least what was written on paper sounded good. The test within, I think it was within 48 hours, keeping everybody in their own room, masking if you have to go in public. They had their own training facilities. The way they staggered the walk-ins and the warm-ups, all of that, trying to keep people distance, keep everything clean, and make sure that nobody who is potentially a carrier interacts with anybody else.
Yeah, that's I think they did a good job. The UFC obviously has some of the biggest resources of the big sport. And that's what I was going to kind of segue into. And I wanted to kind of kick this around with you guys. So we're coming back, June 6th, and we're going to give, I'm anticipating, and so is the venue we're using, that they're going to be allowed at least 50% capacity for gyms at that point. We're going to use a multi-purpose gym. We're going to clear it out. And then we're going to I was talking to Corri about it already. So what should be the foundation if we want to try to have some spectators, allow things to get back to normal a little bit? 100 people, 100 tickets flat. And what would a process like that? I have my process. I want to hear y'all's opinions, and then I'll bounce my stuff back off you guys.
Andrew, you want to take it as a gym owner?
Sure.
June 6th. We're looking like 3 or 4 weeks
June
from now.
6th. So, as we were saying, Houston's been better when it comes to other major cities. We haven't been hit as drastically hard as New York or parts of, Washington State, California, and everything. But it still comes to everyday interaction with people. How are you going to be sure with each spectator, whether they are symptomatic, asymptomatic? The period of incubation within the person is timely. Edgardo from the last event, when he was on your guys' radio show a couple weeks ago, is like
it's crazy.
Prime example. And, he was a constant member of the Houston Jiu-Jitsu community. He trains all the time. And he didn't know going into that event that he could have been sick. He could have been spreading it. There is the idea of doing testing. One of the big tests that I was happy to see was Abbott Laboratories is put out their rapid test. It's a 15-minute test. It basically just works through reverse transcription. You can get a positive result in 3 minutes. You can have a true negative in 15 minutes. It's an incredible test. I read up on their website today that they are trying to pump out like 500,000 kits a day through their manufacturing.
Can they send me like 50 of them? That's all I need is about 50. I don't need 500,000.
Yeah. Well, actually, what's really good about it is the test. So the testing machine they use for it is used in a lot of these test centers here, like Legacy Health. I'm pretty sure has this type of testing methodology. They use it for influenza, they use it for strep throat. So a lot of different types of testing centers within Houston already have them. And so it's basically a cartridge. It's the same type of swab kit. They go deep into the nasal cavity, swab it, put it in the cartridge, and it runs for 15 minutes. And then you have a positive, negative result. So the capability to have that offered to people in Houston so they could do jiu-jitsu, go to jiu-jitsu events, could be something that is needed in the future of this. When it comes to cost, time, who's actually going to sit and get their nasal swab? Because I haven't done it personally, but I've seen the tests and I've talked to friends.
I had it done.
Yeah, you did it?
Yeah, it doesn't look very fun. I don't know if
that was one of the requirements my university is doing to get researchers and staff back on campus is testing everyone. So I got that done.
That's good. So I guess something what we were going to try and do is we were going to send out a pre-screen questionnaire, 3 to 4 days before the event, ask people if they've been in contact with anybody in 14 days, if they've had symptoms, and try and do that check that way. And then we'll have a doctor on site when they come in. We'll do a temp check. We'll make sure that everybody's squared away, do another screen, and then we'll allow them in. And then we'll have seats set up, at 6 feet apart or or however we need to organize it. But the capacity at the venue is almost 500. If it's at 50%, it's 250. If we're doing 100 spectators plus 50 combined staff and athletes, that's well below, the recommended, the recommended capacity for something like that. So, I mean, if it's within the limits, if we do, things like that, obviously we don't have the resources a UFC or some of these other guys do. So we're trying to still do something and still bring people in, because honestly, the crowd is part of the reason I like to do it. Like, I don't like to throw jiu-jitsu shows in an empty room. I'd rather just not waste my time. So
yeah, that almost sounds like kind of the restaurant setup that's going on now, where it's limited capacity. If you've got tables, you just set them all up so that they're far enough apart. The big problem I see is with people interacting between groups.
Yeah. So people are going to be, friendly, because we're going to do seats. It's not going to be, it won't be tables. It'll be seats, probably 3 or 4 rows deep around the matted area. And then there'll be, some different spaces throughout where people can spread out if they want to. And then a big projector kind of on the wall. So, we're going to go for it. I think by June 1st, I think things will hopefully, like, obviously we're going to monitor it, week to week, day to day, like we have been, but I don't know. I think it's time to at least try something and see what we can do, but I'll definitely lean on you guys as it gets closer. But as of now, that seems to be our protocol. How the best way we can do it. Other than, taking blood or, swabbing people as they walk in. I don't know what else we can do,
Yeah. See if we can steal one of those machines and get them in the front of the venue.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Have a waiting area for people. It's like, you got 15 minutes. Yeah.
Just sit down.
And, one of the big things that, you and I talked about this earlier in the week is, when it comes to having the event and pulling in fighters, I too watched what Dana White was doing. I tried to reach out to Chael Sonnen and ask about what they were doing for Submission Underground. And, Dana obviously has the money to pull in getting testing done. But look at what happened with Jacare. This guy was training with his camp. He was by himself the whole time. He was living in there, and he tested positive. He was asymptomatic. So, my curiosity is, when it comes to future events like this, and I'm not just talking about Third Coast, I'm talking about like all jiu-jitsu, all UFC, everything that we're doing. At what point are we going to still test for people? How often are these fighters tested for different things like influenza or anything? They have to have their typical screenings, but when it comes to COVID, is this going to be a new normal that, hey, day before you compete, you have to go to this lab, you have to get this test done? It's just going to be part of the system now until we're vaccinated or, we see a huge decrease.
Well, like with jiu-jitsu, you have kind of like the Wild West. Like, you got guys shooting their ass with steroids. You got all kinds of stuff. Like, asking an athlete to be like, hey, by the way, can you go to this laboratory, pay them $100 and get me a something to show me that they're like, no, I'm going to go fight for somebody else. That's kind of how these guys are. These guys are giving ringworm to each other willingly. They don't care. Like, no, it's like, they're saying, like, and that's my argument with our event. The demographic that's going to come to a Third Coast grappling event is not typically the demographic that's going to, die from COVID, right? They're saying like the majority is, like 70 and 80 years old and above, and they had pre-existing conditions already, right?
Yes, but you also have, so I think that's the one thing that the media really isn't touching on is, we talk about the deaths, and we talk about how it's people with comorbids, the elderly, but you still have a lot of people that are getting sick and that are ending up in the hospital, even if it's for a short period. And then, it still takes several weeks to recover, where, you have ongoing lung issues. You're not back to normal just because you have a mild to moderate case and you're at home. So I hesitate to tell people that, oh, yeah, you're healthy, you'll be fine, you'll survive it. Like, yes, that is one of the outcomes, but there's also the chance that, you do get a slightly more severe disease and, you're out for a significant period of time.
No, yeah, that's true. So the stuff that you're seeing, like that people are getting, may not be, life threatening to them, but it definitely can, take them out of the game for a little bit, and be pretty bad off there. I mean, Edgardo, jiu-jitsu guy, relatively healthy. He said he felt like he was on his deathbed. So. I mean, I know there's just so much disinformation out there, and that's why I wanted to have you guys on, because I just want the straight shot. I'm tired of watching Fox News, laughing at CNN, going to Drudge Report, reading Zero Hedge, going to Reddit. Like I'm and I'm sure everybody else is. Like we just want some straight answers. So what do you see next for Texas, and at least for Houston or Galveston County? I mean, are they going to continue these phased openings and then 2 weeks at a time, or do you see nobody knows what Governor Abbott's going to do? He's going to say throw a salon owner in jail, and then when the political backlash hits, he's going to be like, whoa, let them all out. We didn't mean that. Like it's just everybody is just so back and forth. I don't really know what to expect either. So.
I think what we're going to see is what Corri was mentioning on is, watching the numbers, and that's one thing. I'm not reopening third world jiu-jitsu right away. We're a super underserved area, so I can't put any of these people at risk. So, I've been looking at Harris County and City of Houston's numbers daily, just looking, especially after the reopening, to see how many cases we're seeing, how many tests are being done, looking at the percentages and averages of all these numbers, and just, trying to get an understanding about what's happening. Chris Moriarty, he's a jiu-jitsu black belt, he's a DO. He worked with Grapple Arts and put out this amazing, reopening of jiu-jitsu guidelines, and one of the big things he talked about is every area is different. I think about how Houston as a city is going to reopen versus how the small town in the middle of Texas is going to reopen, where they may have 10 cases this entire time versus our how many thousands of cases we have now. So the small towns that have such a small viral impact can easily reopen better than a city like Houston or New York City or somewhere. So I think every city and every state is going to be working at different levels based on their numbers.
Yeah. And Rand Paul kind of came out today and made a good point about Kentucky, having to be under the same guidelines of, say, a New York. I think the cookie cutter approach in the beginning, I mean, nobody knew, what was going on or who was what. But I mean, it started to become rather clear that the more populous areas on the coast, the Midwest wasn't nearly as badly as affected. So, I mean, you saw it with West Virginia early on. Everybody was like, there's not a single case here. Well, because hardly anybody lives there in a concentrated area. And you saw that across the Midwest and everything. So it's like, I think it's time to get to more of an individualistic approach to how states reopen. And I think that's what they're doing, but there's still that government overhang that's kind of restricting them. Like Georgia reopened, and then now you've seen the cases drop off where people expected an explosion. So I don't know. I mean, it's the experts are saying one thing and what's actually happening are not in line. And I think that's why a lot of America's confused.
Yeah. I mean, Texas is also an interesting situation too, because we've got, a whole bunch of cases coming up now in the Panhandle, in the meatpacking facilities, which is far away from us in Houston, but still worth noting. The other issue that I'm having and I'm struggling with is I live basically on the border of Galveston County and Harris County.
Yeah, so do
I work on the island, but we have plenty of friends and plenty of people we train with who live and work in downtown Houston. And so, Galveston County has been looking good. They rolled out a whole bunch of testing, and I really appreciate how much testing they did. They just stopped it. I wish it would continue, but that's okay. So it's like, I look at Galveston County, I'm like, all right, we're looking good, we're trending well. But then I look at Harris County and I'm like, I'm a little unsure. And you've got plenty of traffic going back and forth, but people are only being counted in their county of residence. So, that's something that I think every gym owner needs to take into account, every business needs to take into account, is how much transport do you have between counties, between cities, and what is that going to mean for your business and the impact on your customers or your students?
Yeah, so I mean, you see how, Galveston County's handled it, and then you look at, say, Alina Hidalgo in Houston and Harris County. She's caught a lot of flack over the way she's kind of and you know what, she deserves it, but it kind of like the way things were going with her, it seemed like every day she was saying something, and then police unions and then so and so would just come out against her. And this is why I say I want to avoid the political side of it, but there seems to be very political implications on both sides. On the left, maybe they want to make this look really bad. So it says, hey, Trump, you had the best economy, but you tanked it over this. And you have the right that wants to say, mitigate it. It's not a big deal. We're going to reelect it, make America great, blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, I think that's what people need to see, is that there's more to it at play than just the numbers and the sickness and the death. That's what they want you to see. I think there's a lot more with it being an election season and a lot more at stake. I don't know. I think this is just one distraction and many to come, to be honest with you. And I don't I mean, that's a mouthful, but that's how I felt about it. And I don't know how we go out of it, because you make a national healthcare issue into a political issue. And now it's more or less about money and power rather than the people that are affected. And I think that's the big issue.
And one thing that we were touching on earlier was about, whether a person truly dies from COVID or if they died from other complications while having COVID. There's almost a bias here that, it depends on, as Corey said, the person who signs off on it states how the person died. So, if this is someone who is super anti the shutdown or something, and they're like, oh, well, it was just pneumonia. Or if you have someone who is really for, pumping up the COVID numbers, they could be the ones who are saying, oh, yeah, definitely COVID, even though they were 99 years old and, they still tested positive. So it's one of those things where, there's not enough checks and balances. And, even with my background coming in compliance, you see how easily numbers can be skewed. And I mean, that's the beauty of statistics. So it's definitely played in people's favors if they have an agenda for it. So it's political.
Well, I mean, the stuff that comes out against Dr. Fauci, who's been in 5 administrations, and then you got, the stuff on Dr. Birx, and then you got that crazy lady, the Miskowitz or whatever her name was. And like now it's like it's starting. Everybody's trying to discredit Fauci because Fauci's coming out spitting the real talk, and it doesn't coincide with the White House, who he's supposed to be on the task force. So it's like you're discrediting the experts. You're saying, hey, listen to the doctors, listen to the science, but the guys that are the best at it, you're disregarding and trying to throw them out because they don't meet your confirmation bias. It just doesn't make sense.
Yeah, one thing I do want to say about that is, and this is for everyone, like when you're looking at what a specific person is saying, especially, somebody like Fauci, realize that he has an entire team behind him that is working day and night to analyze this stuff and come up with the reports. You've got the CDC, you've got NIH researchers, you've got HHS, you've got like a lot of people who are coming up with these things. And yes, he's the face. Yes, he is incredibly smart in delivering a lot of information, but it's not just him. It's not just Fauci saying this and that. It's a team of experts. And so, yeah, it bothers me when people target out individuals saying that they're making the wrong call. It's, there are people discussing this and coming up with the guidelines.
No, for sure. I mean, and I guess there is no, like I said, cookie cutter approach to us, that it should be more specific to each state's needs and even down to a city's needs, because I mean, there could be cities like Houston that are hurting, but then you got Angleton, Texas, that has 2 cases that has to be locked down too. I don't know. I just think that more of an individualistic strategic approach rather than a broad based, throw a blanket on top of everything and hope for it to work. It just hasn't seemed to have been the most productive. But I guess we'll move on to, what's the effect going to be like long term? Is this thing going to be part of our normal lives, seasonal kind of deal, or is this going to be something that comes and goes?
Yeah, I mean, so we don't know about the seasonality yet. I talked about this last time. We're seeing cases all around the globe in every season possible, in the tropics, up north, everywhere. So we don't really know about seasonality yet. It is a possibility. Again, we're just going to have to wait and see. The possibility for it to continue circulating is very high. And I think I mentioned last time there are already 4 coronaviruses that circulate every single year. They cause a common cold. And so that is a possibility. SARS went away. So who knows? SARS won. So there's that. But meanwhile, we still have MERS that, trying to remember when that outbreak started, in the Middle East. It is still going. They have not been able to fully break that transmission chain. Now that one comes with a much higher case fatality rate of about 30%. Unfortunately, that's not what we're dealing with. But yeah, it could be here for a while.
Yeah, that's that. What do you think, Doc?
So one of the big things we have to think about too is the sheer beauty of evolution with all these different strains, especially what we're seeing right now with COVID. You know, we have one of the largest genetic sequencing labs in the country is here in Houston, and they're sequencing all of the Houston samples that are coming through. Thing I've touched on a few times that's really interesting is that we're seeing different genetic mutations in different areas. So where everything that was in the Washington, California area had very distinct genetic markers that made it very obvious that it came directly from China. When we look at what hit New York City, it had a lot of the genetic variations that we are seeing from Europe. So we're seeing how we have slightly different strains that are affecting communities and populations differently. Within New York, there's so much, they've seen several different genetic variants there, but when it seems to compared to Houston and Texas, we have, as they're saying, a weaker strain. And that's just in the last however months we're into this now. So in the next year, are we going to see a new type of shift and we're going to have a slightly different vaccine like we're seeing with different flus? You know, your common flu vaccine will have different of the H3N2 is one of the big ones. That was the big flu that everyone's now pushing around from the Woodstock photo. That's just absolutely ridiculous. But that was from 1968, and now it's still in our flu vaccines today. So we're going to see slight evolution of these viruses and these mutations that are going to need to be addressed. And where SARS, coronaviruses in general, we just don't have the depth of knowledge that we have with influenza. So we're going to need to see something like a vaccine that is altered year, basically, in the exact way we had the flu vaccine.
So I mean, I guess I'll get on this question. So is this wet market created, or is this an accidental release from that high level lab in Wuhan? I mean, y'all hear all the conspiracies, y'all hear all, I mean, I'm sure y'all read it all, but what's the truth? I mean, do you think it really did mutate from a wet market, or do you think this was an accidental? I mean, Corri, you've worked at high level labs, and Doc, I know you have as well. Is it easy for something to just slip out?
No.
What are we talking here?
I don't think people understand the amount of checks in place to make sure that this sort of thing doesn't happen. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Viruses have jumped from animals to humans many, many, many times for many, many years. It's not surprising that it happened again.
So that's it.
People have been predicting this for decades.
I mean, but Fauci said it, I think it was in 2014. He was saying, hey, we need to get ready. Large scale pandemic could be coming our way. But I mean, if these are starting at these wet markets in China, why are they still being allowed? Like multiple viruses I don't care if it's a human rights thing or not, stop slaughtering animals where other animals have been slaughtered to give them a chance to spread into these killer viruses. It should be something that should have been stopped a long time ago.
No, so that's something that's a huge topic of debate. There's someone I follow on Twitter who talks about this. I like the comment, is coughing in someone's mouth going to be considered a submission? Maybe. I don't know.
I don't know. I will call that a TKO because, we'll
Bring
get
it
you
up at the rules meeting.
Yeah, we'll get you a ventilator after you submit. But yeah, we'll be good.
So about the wet market and, zoonotic transmission. So yes, they can be a problem, but one thing you have to think about is right now we know about them. Right now we can go out and we can test samples at these markets. We can keep an eye on what diseases are happening in these farms, are coming about at the wet market, and could be transmitted. If you put a ban on wet markets, you're going to drive them underground. You're not going to stop them. They're just going to go into hiding. And that's going to make it a lot harder for scientists to go out and sample and, keep track of what the next thing could be.
Like, look, I like fresh fish or fresh chicken, just as much as the next guy. But if what I'm doing, my practice is causing global pandemics, like maybe it's time to get in. I don't know if it's a religious thing or what it is, but I mean, something has to be done, right? I mean, this is this. What else is originated over there? SARS.
Well,
I mean, these other sorts of viruses.
So there are groups in every country that go around testing wildlife. Especially once big MERS issue, there was already a lab in that area that's doing these testings consistently. These scientists go into the field with swab kits and just checking random animals to see what type of virus mutations they're finding out there. Like the genetic sequencing done on all these viral strains is consistent. When you think about the swine flu that's hit in of Asia, this has killed tons of people every year. And it's not just it's going untouched, it's just how fast can they work? How much resource can be put into this? We're very fortunate in the States. We have a lot of scientific funding, but other countries that are, poorer nations don't. So there is still a check going on. Avian flu is tested consistently throughout the world. Swine flu is tested throughout the flu. Different coronaviruses are tested throughout the world, but you can't win them all. And when you see a mutation between multiple animals that causes these type of hard viruses that are so deadly, that's mutation's even harder to find, because you'll swab a pig and you're like, oh, weird, why is there avian flu mixed in here? And it's either a genetic sequencing fault, because things happen, base calling isn't perfect yet, or it's a new virus that's popping up.
So where were these viruses and what were the great viruses of say the 70s and 80s or 60s? What was, other than the AIDS virus? I mean, of course, Ebola as well. But why the sudden, influx in all these crazy respiratory viruses from the Far East? It just seems like, it's been more prevalent now than in history, or maybe I just don't know my history. That's a question for you guys, but.
Yeah, I got to pull up my history timeline. I'm not too keen on it. I mean, you can look back and see there were plenty of influenzas that popped up and had, huge mortality and morbidity rates throughout the years. That's not anything new. It's just which ones are highly publicized and, hit a large population. Yeah, that's all I got to say about that. But I guess I'll add to it. So it's not just Asia. We've got stuff coming out everywhere. And, there are, like Andrew said, there are researchers that are looking everywhere. There was a study that came out in South America where they, I think it was Trinidad bats. Oh, we lost Andrew.
No, trying to get him back. We'll see. Here, 1 second.
Back?
Are you back?
Am I here?
Here, hold on. Yeah, hold on 1 second. 1 second. Kick. You joined right back. It's just me and you for now, Corey. So, but we lost Andrew for a sec.
They sampled a bunch of bats in Trinidad, and They look to see what viruses were circulating there. And it's just like Andrew was saying, you look to see what could make the jump. If we jump back to funding that we talked about before, there was a big project to sample animals, and that just got funding pulled recently. So that's going to be a huge hit to this whole field of zoonotic diseases.
Sorry about that, Andrew. We were talking about you. We didn't want you to hear it, so we went ahead and.
That's all right. I understand.
Well, I got a really cool question from somebody on Facebook. So it says, do you think the fact that it was made in a laboratory will make it more resistant to the pharmaceuticals we developed?
It was not made in a laboratory. So I actually used to do genetic sequencing genetic manipulation during my master's. Whenever you do any type of manipulation in genomes, there are certain markers. We can't just insert DNA into a sequence. We have to have like different cassettes or different vectors that kind of hold a home in there, and they're easily found. I know a lot of people have seen different write-ups saying, oh, it was lab made. The best journal for all peer-reviewed science is called Nature. It's the highest, most, if you get a Nature paper, you've made it. Nature put out a paper that basically said, here's the map, here's everything. It is not lab made. I can speak from collaborators of mine here in Houston that do genetic sequencing who have sequences. They are not seeing any of those markers that would say that it's lab made. This happens often. Viruses are made. We've seen all these different viruses throughout centuries of time, and genetic manipulation is not that old in science. And, the technology is just not great. There's a lot of conspiracy.
It's not easy.
Well,
it's definitely not.
Well, I mean, you look at these days, like with nuclear and biological and chemical threats that are expanding as science grows and as threats grow around the world. Like, people are getting more into the biological warfare to where they can say, how hard would it be to weaponize? I mean, you wouldn't want to weaponize this. I mean, you're going to kill a bunch of old people? Like, yeah. No, I'm just kidding. But like, if you were to weaponize something, I mean, what would that look like? I mean, somebody wanted to say, okay, well, I want to make a super flu that's going to take out 70% of the people that contract it. Like, is that something that people in labs right now can do? Or is it more or less like you're stuck to anthrax and all these other crazy things that come out?
I mean, basically, when it comes to genetic manipulation, one of the things is we don't know how it reacts. One of the big sciences that's out right now is Crispr Technology, which is a DNA deletion type technology. And CRISPR could be what stops most all ailments, most all sicknesses. There's a few CRISPR's technologies in clinical trial right now for, HIV, HSV, HPV. But they're in clinical trials because we don't know what's going to happen. We know how we can delete DNA. We can do it in vitro. We can do it computationally. But in a human who has a unique genome, we have no clue what the reaction is going to be. So if you think that there are mad scientists out there who are spending their time trying to figure out how to make this, I'll tell you, science is really expensive. And even when you think about the weaponization of this, there was a lab that tried to do a CRISPR baby. They got caught really fast.
Yeah.
And they've been blackmailed, blacklisted. They are not doing anything science related. So yeah, I hear this a lot, especially in the pharmaceutical side. It's a lot of fairy tale stuff. So I'll tell you, personally, I've worked with almost every major pharmaceutical company because I ran a core lab. And so, we've worked with everyone. A lot of them don't know what they're doing in general. They source out a lot of their work for a reason.
Well, I think I saw a tweet at the beginning of this when the conspiracy came up, and it was some virologist that basically said, y'all are giving scientists way too much credit to make the no, we would not be able to, make these changes and keep them hidden and all of that. No, don't give us that much credit.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess I'm asking. I mean, one of my most profound moments was getting ready to. I'm like an 18-year-old, private getting ready to deploy, and they're like, "Hey, boy, let me get you with this 6 rounds of anthrax shots and these smallpox shots." And like that, by you get to like the 3rd or 4th round of the anthrax vaccine, your arm feels like it's about to fall off. It hurts so bad. And then the smallpox thing, it looks like you're getting. I'm not going to be too vulgar, but it leaves a really nasty scar. So, I mean, they do those for a reason. So smallpox, anthrax, those type of things, they're being made to be weaponized in the battle. Mustard gas. I mean, all these different things that people are able to use for nefarious purposes. They initially smallpox, anthrax, they started in a lab, right?
So, no, the difference with those is that they took a natural agent and they manipulated the dispersal. And it's more of a chemical and a physical thing than biological. It's just changing how it goes out into the population. The biological the pathogen itself is natural.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, anthrax is just out there.
Yeah,
it's, especially in mail to Congress, they probably get that them scares still pretty regularly. But so I guess we'll get into a little bit more of where do we go next? What do you guys recommend for say the next 30 days? We've been living 30 days by 30 days, it seems like, ever since March. I was hardcore shut down. Me and my wife and daughter. My wife was in school, my daughter was in school. I worked from home, so it was like boom, all 3 of us stuck in the house for like six or 7 weeks, and we didn't leave. We did it hardcore style, and I spent part of it depressed because I had to cancel an event over it, or multiple events. But I mean, what's next? I mean, are people going to just slowly get back to normal, or are people going to be wanting to take shots at the bar and have stuff commingled? And how does America change on the other side of this? I mean, it's going to be permanent, correct?
I mean, we're still going to have to look week by week. I don't know if you saw the numbers coming out. I believe Galveston Daily News posted it. The weekend Galveston Beach opened back up. I believe it was 118,000 cars or people crossed the causeway. Normally on like a holiday weekend, I think it's 180. So does that answer your question? If we just open, people are going to go.
But that's what I'm saying. So at this point, the economic impact that people are experiencing, you now have people that are on unemployment from a job they lost, and they're making more money now on unemployment with that $600 kicker, which is and they're extending benefits. They say till January, February. It's now these unemployed are not going to bounce back because they're giving an incentive to not go back to work. Like, why am I going to go back to work and make $1,000 less a month than if I wouldn't just stay on unemployment?
Universal basic income.
I mean, we can get into that too, but if y'all want to, but it's the $1,200 stimulus, and then like the beefed up unemployment and all these social programs. It just is like, I don't know. I mean, essential versus non-essential, that even was even lobbied. I mean, you got Mattress Mac, who lobbied the city of Houston to allow furniture stores to stay open as an essential business, and you got nobody shopping at these furniture stores. Like, they're just having to pay their rent, they're having to keep their employees who are mostly commission based, and it just seems like it was just totally mishandled. I just get disgusted each day I read more and more about it.
Yeah, and the big issue too is, the coming from my side of things in science, they dictated who and who wasn't essential, and research labs within the city shut down. MD Anderson, Baylor, Methodist, all the research labs stopped. Clinical labs, dependent on what they were studying, got to stay open, but in general, most of them were shut down too. So even when it comes to how people are determining what is essential, what is not essential, to me as a scientist, we're not going to progress in medicine without research, and it got shut down for weeks. I heard from a certain institute in this country that they basically got told at like 8 a.m., hey, you all need to come, clear out what you can clear out, sacrifice what you can, because we're shutting down at 2 o'clock. And so people had basically just flush away months or years worth of work. So, the whole essential, non-essential, it's really been such a divided topic on every form, and everyone's saying
it's political. Like it goes back to political, like we were talking about earlier. Like I wanted to stay away from it, but you get churches which are registered as nonprofits with the government. And I think out of 120,000 churches that applied for SBA loans, 90,000 got them, yet they're nonprofits. Like, I don't get that at all. Like it was just so many different things that have gone wrong. The money that went to Shake Shack and all these other giant corporations. And like these SBA, just like give it to the people that need it, the small businesses, the ones that are, living, job to job, or, that could actually use it, not people that have millions in lines of credit. It just, I don't know. The whole situation it screams politics, and it screams lobbyist. I mean, depending on what side you're on. So are we past the medical situation to where it's like political now? Like it's going to be like, oh, the left's going to want to, keep testing open and keep California locked down forever? Or is it going to be like finally, like, are we going to just get back to normal?
One of my big takes away is we have to get our numbers down. We can't see a continual increase. That's the big push that I had for reopening Third Ward Jiu-Jitsu, is looking how we're doing on a daily basis. I've already told the team we're going to recheck in June. We'll recheck if numbers are still growing. Probably not going to reopen. So it's dependent on the people too. There's a lot of pushback on the mask, and it's hard for me as a scientist and someone who works in this to understand why people wouldn't want to wear the mask. It's kind of like the whole seatbelt deal. It's like, it can save your life. It can save other people's lives. Let's just, wear the mask for a little bit and go back to it. When we have all these people who are adamant about not wearing them, it's like, these are the people who could be spreading it. Granted, they may not have it. They may never be affected by it, but it's for the good of everyone. If we wear the masks, if we socially distant, if we don't go crazy at the beach, we're more likely to open up sooner than if we're all just living our lives like the virus is gone, just because we could reopen Texas.
Yeah, I think there's been some fatigue with the quarantine. I think it's to the point now that people are like, I mean, what would it have looked like if we said, hey, you know what, we got a coronavirus, we got COVID-19, but this is what we're going to do, and we're not going to shut anything down, and we're going to go back. I mean, do you think because what we initially did, right, to flatten the curve was to ease the burden on the hospitals, correct? To make sure the hospitals didn't overflow. Okay, we saw that wasn't going to be an issue early on. We weren't going to have an Italy-like situation, because Italy was, traditionally older people. They don't really have, that advanced of a medical system, especially set up for this. I mean, why are we still messing around like that?
Well, I mean, so the whole shutting down, it was two-part. Part of it was, don't overburden the hospitals, but part of it was also to prepare. Andrew spoke to earlier, here in Houston, we got almost insider information. We saw what was happening in Washington, in California, Florida, New York, and we saw what we would need to do to prepare in case that happened here. And so, I think that's something that we also need to look at as we open up, is, are hospitals now prepared and now situated to take care of an increase in cases?
No, yeah. And honestly, Corri, and I could sit here and be all mad at the government all I want. You gave us some great advice early on, because like you said, you were looking at the other sources of the virus. You're looking at New York, and we were able to kind of crystal ball it to the point to where we nailed it. We were able to save the fighters from coming in. We still tried to salvage a card. Edgardo ended up not coming to the event because we canceled it. There was a lot of things that came into play because we took real data from real people I trust, and we were able to make great decisions. And I think a lot of people are just following the leader. They're like, oh, well, the UFC's doing this, Submission Underground's doing this, or this and that. But you're not the UFC. You're not Submission Underground. You don't have the resources. You don't have their system in place. And that's why I don't agree with, across the board type guidelines for people, because like for Gracie Baja, for instance, biggest organization in jiu-jitsu. They have to look at their global impact and what they're doing. So their strategy is going to be much different than, say, a mom and pop that has 200 or 300 members, that is basically just keeping the lights on with their people, whereas you have that
grappling dummies. So here in Webster, they bought grappling dummies for every student to use. Again, if you're a small gym, you can't necessarily afford that.
Yeah, we're making them for our gym.
Well, they had to clone me, so like I'm the big dummy they cloned for all the Gracie Baja dummies. No, I'm just kidding, but it's just weird to see how things have really went from, because I was right there, like, oh my God, we got to do what we got to do, flatten the curve, let's do what we can, make the right decisions, this, and that, and then I get to the part where I'm starting to get bitter because I'm seeing kind of like friends losing their businesses. I had a couple of friends commit suicide, some extended friends. I mean, there was just a lot of socio-economic impacts that I don't think the government was even looking at, because data. Well, look at the data for people that are, that are committing suicide. I mean, look at that data for all the mental health issues that were exacerbated by having to go, to video calls or phone calls for their therapist, there's just so many things that were disrupted in people's lives that I didn't think they realized kind of the butterfly effect of changing this one thing and what it's going to do, down the road.
I'll say this. A lot of public health professionals did see that as an issue. Again, it's one of those things where, you have plenty of people who know it's going to happen and, try to sound an alarm about it, but it's who listens. And so, we've known that there's a problem with socioeconomic status and access to healthcare. That's been around forever. I think I've taken 3 classes in my MPH just on that. And this situation just highlighted how bad it really is. So like, we know it's there. It's just nothing's been done.
Yeah. And my background in social work, I kind of look at that background where you look at the different populaces. Like you look at the Caucasians, you look at African Americans, and you can tell by, even if you look at poverty levels and you look at income levels, that there are more widespread cases in poor, more multicultural communities than there are in other areas. And I think that just has to come with people can't afford the testing. They're not being informed enough. They're getting bad information. And I think that really is hamstringing people, where they're most effective, the most, while, I think they kind of get left behind in all this. And Andrew, you being in Third Ward, you could probably even speak even more about that.
Yeah, that's one of the things. One of my good friends, Deepak Doshi, he owns Doshi House. It's a cafe in Third Ward. He and I've met a couple times during all of this to kind of discuss, like, how is our community being directly affected? When we look at the Harris County maps, Third Ward does have a handful of positive cases. I don't know. I think we had a few deaths in the Third Ward. But, there are so many people that own businesses in the Third Ward that are super struggling right now, and they don't know what to do. They don't know how they can reopen right now. So yeah, that's just one of the underserved areas of Houston. When you think about areas like the 5th Ward or the 1st Ward too, these are all areas that we have to think about, that these communities aren't accessing the testing, they aren't accessing the SBA loans, they're
not educated. They're not filing for unemployment because they don't realize that they can. There's just a whole group of people that are just kind of being left behind to kind of fend for themselves. And these public hospitals, the Ben Taubes and all these other ones, are maybe not as equipped as a lot of these private hospitals are. They have the funding and access to a lot of the cutting edge stuff that's coming out. So it's I don't know. It's sad.
I will say, if you haven't looked at it yet, I do appreciate this with the Harris County Health District, their coronavirus dashboard, they have zip code breakdowns. So you can actually see the number of cases and deaths per zip code. If you haven't looked at it yet, I recommend going to look, and you can see, just as Andrew said, and Ryan, you too, that it's hitting the low SES underserved communities the hardest.
Yep.
All right, let's see. Here's a question that came up, Andrew, and then we'll try and wrap it up in the next 10 or so minutes. So what's the info on antibody testing? Will it become more available? And if so, I want to know, is it available in Houston already?
It is. It actually's been available in Houston for a few weeks now. Quest Diagnostics is using Abbott Labs. I actually went and took one because I was curious if I had exposure. You know, I cross-train a lot of different gyms. I work in the med center. I figured, maybe we'll see. Right now, you do have to get a prescription. There's several different medical offices that will provide it to you. I think I paid $30 for mine. And then I was told by the medical office that I went through that your insurance is not charging you for the antibody test. But the issue is the false positive, false negative results. They're not 100%. And, you know, ELISA testing is what we use for antibody testing. It's just not as precise of a science as the real-time PCR for viral testing. So it's kind of a catch-22. If you've had a positive qPCR test that you had coronavirus, you had the symptoms, everything, you're fine, you're good. You know, even if you took the antibody test and you got the positive result, you're good to go. If you were asymptomatic and you took an antibody test and you got a false negative, okay, that's not so bad. But if you took the antibody test without ever being exposed to COVID and you got a false positive, then you're essentially
immune, right?
Susceptible to anyone else.
Or no?
So it's kind of a false hope sort of thing. You know, it's all of these antibody tests have gone through emergency use authorization, which basically means the companies provide enough evidence to the FDA to say, hey, look, we're 99.9% sure it works. Big part of what I do in compliance is validation of tests. And it's not an easy thing. You know, you're looking at 30, 40,000 data points, you ship it off to the FDA and they stamp off on it. Right now, the FDA is overwhelmed. So what if you screwed up? So it's kind of a risky thing. You know, there is emergency use authorization for a lot of these, you know, live COVID tests, the RT-PCR, qPCR test. That is a much more simple defined test than what is an antibody test. You're also, the load of IgM, IgG antibodies in your system are variable depending on your exposure. So even if you had COVID and you had like super low symptoms, you weren't overall that sick, you had a low viral load, you may have almost undetectable antibodies. So it's kind of a gamble. The best test is the live virus test. So it's a catch-22 for the antibodies.
So do you see?
Yeah,
go ahead, Corey.
I was gonna say, I just want to add a couple points to that. The other thing that we still don't know about is whether or not the antibodies, if you do show up antibody positive, whether or not the antibodies are going to be protective. We also don't know how long they're going to last. You know, it might be a year, it might be 3 years. We just don't know yet. With the other coronaviruses, you know, the common cold ones, I believe they're, I'm trying to remember which one's which. One lasts a couple years, and then SARS, MERS, I believe, is about 3 years. I might have those inverse though. And the big numbers, Andrew, you can correct me on my stats and sensitivity, specificity stuff. You know, that's what's normally provided, is sensitivity and specificity. So the ability to, you know, catch a true positive and correctly rule people in or out. But what you also need to take into account is the overall prevalence in the community. And so that you use to calculate the positive predictive value and the negative predictive value. And so, you know, if you don't have a lot of cases in your community, a false positive, you know, you might get a 50-50 chance of a false positive versus a true positive. And so it's what Andrew was saying. What does your positive test mean? It means nothing. It's a coin flip.
What does the world look like if we just say, okay, we get this is bad, but go on with your lives? Like, what does America look like if we just if we just had small directives out, wash your hands, wear a mask, you know, and we just went about our lives? What do you think things will look like? And I want an honest answer. What do you think?
How well are people going to adhere to it? I've been so I work on the island, and probably once a week I'm in there once or twice a week, and I've been taking Seawall because I need to see it for myself, what people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
I see maybe 5 people masked. I see the restaurants full. Like, no, people aren't listening. It's a compliance issue.
So, I mean, with the compliance, I mean, so this was the only answer, is just saying, hey, everybody, you're on lockdown. That was basically the only answer. It's basically because you can't trust people to do the right thing. I mean,
what's really difficult about this is, I went to the grocery store. Yeah, I did a grocery store pickup order the other day, and
good point.
I could see the people coming out of the grocery store, and maybe 30% of the people had a mask on.
Yeah, let me do my quick masking here. So masks only work if you cover both your nose and mouth. That doesn't work. I have a whole, you can see it on Facebook, you can see it on my Twitter. I have a whole yes, no.
So can I wear my Halloween mask as a proper
Is your nose and mouth covered? That's all I care about.
Yeah, it's like Freddy Krueger mask.
As long as your nose and mouth are covered.
Nice. And goes Robert England tomorrow when I go out for groceries. I'm just kidding.
I do want to say something about that, because I was looking through the gym opening guidelines, and they do mention masking and
gloves.
And gloves. Okay. First of all, the gloves, that's just stupid. I'm just going to call that out.
Absolutely crazy.
I don't even wash my belt. You want me to wear gloves and a mask?
Your hands are dirty?
Like, what are you?
That's how COVID started. It's all you.
Yeah, exactly.
No. Long tradition.
So, I mean, your hands are dirty, and if you put a glove on your hands, the glove is dirty. If you touch your face, you're still contaminating your face. A glove is not magic. Like, you still need to wipe everything down, not touch your face. Masks while working out.
Training mask.
You're better off maintaining your 6-foot distance. There have been, there's every sort of mask out there. And, if you're wearing one of those tight fitting ones, there's a lot of resistance and it's hard to breathe. And you don't realize you can't breathe until it's too late, sort of thing.
And this is also a great chance for people that are very ugly from like this part down. They have like real nice eyes to really get out there and hit it off with the ladies. So just find a great group of masked people. If you've got great eyes, this is your time, guys. It's your time to shine. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I guess, we'll go off. We'll get to this question real quick, because I want to ask, and then we'll kind of slow things out. But it says hydroxychloroquine. That was the Donald Trump miracle remedy. And a Z-Pack. I was kind of like, this sounds kind of iffy. And then now that res whatever it's called, that's coming out. Yeah. So what's the cutting edge? What's the promising for the treatment? Is it just stay home and act like you have the man flu, or is there going to actually be drugs that can kind of remediate the symptoms, kind of like you have with HIV? Drugs came out to help with the symptoms, that sort of deal.
Yeah, so there are a lot of studies going on. First, I want to say, do not ask for hydroxychloroquine. Pretty sure the study finally came out that said there's absolutely no difference, and maybe it was actually worse, because there are a lot of side effects with taking hydroxychloroquine. Just because it's FDA approved doesn't mean you should pop it like ibuprofen. Like, there's still side effects. The remdesivir study, so I actually worked on this one. It's really interesting. The full data has not come out yet, so we are eagerly awaiting that publication. But I'm sure everybody's heard Fauci had that little release of, there was a noticeable decrease in the amount of time that somebody was in the hospital when taking remdesivir. And so they've now called remdesivir as the standard of care treatment. And so they're moving on. The trial that was, yes. So the trial that was using that is actually an adaptive trial. So the cool thing about that is that as, we'd see that a drug works or doesn't work, we can add it on as standard of care or remove it from it. So with the next phase of this trial, everybody on that study will receive remdesivir. There is no more placebo group. Nobody's getting a sugar pill. And then they added on a immune modulating drug to try to see if that will have any effect. Because that's, remdesivir, so it's an antiviral. It works against the virus, but part of what people are getting really sick from is the body's reaction to the virus. So this immune modulator I'll say may, I have no idea if it will or not, may help with that aspect of the disease.
Awesome. What do you think, Doc?
Yeah, I've always been intrigued whenever we've had new drugs that are coming through in these fast-paced trials. For people who don't know, a typical clinical trial is about 10 years and about $1 billion. And that's from like drug idea to drug being on the market. And it's typically done in phases to where we would do in vitro study, something that's computational or in a cell line, move to an animal study, move to a small population of humans, larger population of humans, big group of humans, and then there's a consistent check-in over time. So whenever you hear about these drugs that are happening, like they did this with the Ebola breakout in 2014, when they really tried to push ZMapp, and now with this current drug with Gilead, it's always intriguing because it's always the long process of a clinical trial. So how we can really deem a drug being safe, we can understand the side effects, especially now that they've moved past using placebo. Truly understanding the side effects of the drug are going to kind of be a little wonky, but at the rate people are dying from this, it's a pandemic. People are just trying to save lives. I think it's a positive move. They've seen great effects in their treatment so far. It's nice that the drug was already designed because those previously used for other drugs. So it's kind of like a lot of the hard work was already done. So like the efficacy, knowing it's not going to kill people, knowing it's not going to have like the craziest side effects is great. That's why we can move forward a lot faster. I think it will be great to see how the data shows overall after a larger exposure of patients have been given the drug.
That's awesome. So last question I'll go. So mask. What's up with Dr. Fauci saying in the beginning, don't wear them, now to saying wear them? Corri, I want to hear because I know you have a good explanation for this. That'll make a lot of sense.
Okay, yeah. This video that's being referenced, I made this mistake on Facebook. You can see it and make fun of me and hate me for it. If it's the 60 Minutes video that's circulating, that was actually back from March. Yeah, I saw it and I'm like, okay, well, that's interesting new stuff. Yeah, it's an old video. But that someone has decided to circulate for disinformation. Yeah, I would go with that. It popped up. That being said, if you look back in March, what he said was right now, with the way things are, everybody does not need to be wearing a mask. Healthcare workers, high-risk people, those are the ones who need to be wearing a mask. And that's what was true back in March. Even now, again, it's the high-risk groups, hospital workers who need to be wearing should be wearing the specialized masks. So those are the N95s, the respirators, every variety of those. The cloth masks, or I should say cloth face coverings, or surgical masks, those again are to prevent unknown spread. So even back in March, he was saying, if you have symptoms, wear a mask. Everybody was saying that. It's the same with flu. You see in flu season, there's masks at every hospital door. If you are coughing, sneezing, have a fever, put on a mask.
Exactly, yeah.
Now it's just, as we're learning about asymptomatic spread or asymptomatic transmission, we're trying to stop that by having everybody wear a mask.
Now they're saying, I read something that there's sexual transmission possibly of the disease now through body fluids, or is that false?
I saw one report that they were able to detect, I believe it was RNA in semen. I don't know if they cultured live virus out of that. So just, one thing to be aware of when reading reports, presence of RNA does not mean presence of live virus.
So if you're looking, so COVID-19 is now also something you need to get tested before. If you have a risque life with multiple partners, you don't want to catch that
I'm not
corona.
saying that.
I'm just kidding.
But this is, it's interesting, and people are going to study it. Up until the 2014 outbreak of Ebola, we didn't know that Ebola could persist in semen. So that was a new finding with a high number of cases.
I just had to give that one a flash.
Yeah, there's so many things that we just don't know until we see a lot of cases.
All right. Well, I keep saying last one, but this truly is the last one, guys. I appreciate both of you because this is a great question. How do you feel about Sweden's approach to the virus, and is herd immunity something that the United States should consider?
So, herd immunity. That's been a big one. No. Just gonna go with no. So herd immunity by vaccines? Yes. Herd immunity by exposing everyone? No. You are putting way too many people at risk, and it would cause unnecessary death, unnecessary injury. Again, we don't know the long-term damage caused by this infection. People get scar tissue in their lungs and can't go back to normal life. Sweden, it's hard to I said this before, it's hard to compare different countries. The culture there is different than the culture is here, and so
the climate's different, everything's different,
Like, I think I saw something that even though they're saying you can go out, most people stay at home anyways. Like, they have their social contract and they're not going out and about everywhere. So you really have to look at an individual country, individual state basis.
Awesome. Well, guys and gal, I appreciate you joining us. I mean, I'm very fortunate to have two of you guys like that in our back pocket here in Houston as the gyms start to open. We try to get an event off. We're definitely going to continue to lean heavily on you guys. I appreciate y'all taking your time. Two jiu-jitsu people with us that specialize in this. I mean, it's a match made in heaven. So I appreciate it. And you definitely will be hearing from me offline as we continue to try and make the best decisions for jiu-jitsu, for us, our family, staff, and everybody around the world. So I appreciate you guys' time.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
All right, guys. Thanks. One second. All right.